Despite all of the challenges that lie ahead in 2024, yes, the New Orleans Saints are indeed a marketable destination for a top-flight offensive coordinator candidate. Let's discuss why. We got all that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, here on the Locked On Saints podcast, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed media member covering the New Orleans Saints as the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at why hiring from the Sean McVey scheme and tree is a really, really good choice for the New Orleans Saints with the help of our friend Travis Rogers from over at Locked On Rams. We're going to be breaking down Mickey Loomis's questionable comparisons of Dennis Allen to Hall of Fame head coaches. What? And to get us all started today, we're also going to be taking a look at why the New Orleans Saints are indeed a good landing spot for a top-flight offensive coordinator candidate despite the challenges that lie ahead. I appreciate you, as always, for being an everydayer here on Locked On Saints and making us your first listen of the day every day here as a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy and the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. All right. Listen, I know the New Orleans Saints have some challenges ahead of them in 2024. We'll highlight those challenges here in a little bit, or at least some of them. But make no mistake about it, the New Orleans Saints are indeed a good destination for a top-flight offensive coordinator candidate. Yes, I know that this New Orleans Saints team has a head coach in Dennis Allen that has struggled to inspire much confidence in the organization as of right now. Yes, I know that Michael Thomas isn't going to be back in 2024, but that always probably isn't going to be back in 2024, but that always felt like that might be the case. This New Orleans Saints team has to rebuild its offensive line. They're now in the midst of that offensive coordinator search, and they've missed the playoffs in each of the last 3 years. But let's not underestimate the ego of the NFL, because above all else, when it comes to the New Orleans Saints, it's not about what they don't provide, it's about what they do. And it's about the fact that when it comes down to these candidates all across the NFL that are looking for jobs, looking for opportunities, they all believe without a shadow of a doubt that 100% whatever organization they walk into, they will save. Do not underestimate the ego of the NFL. There is no such thing as, oh, well, that quarterback's not as good and that scheme's not as good and, oh, that team. No. What they see instead, and this is the difference between looking at the NFL from inside the NFL and looking at the NFL from outside the NFL, is that we will look at it and say, this isn't a good landing spot. And outside of the obvious situations, a Dan Snyder-led Washington Commanders team, a David Tepper-owned Carolina Panthers team, those are severe red flags, whether you're looking at it from outside or inside. But when it comes down to the challenge of making an offense better, there's very little situations in which any offensive coordinator is going to go, I can't make that better. Every single offensive coordinator candidate feels that they can walk into any situation and make it the best in the NFL. That's the ego of the NFL. So let's not overvalue or overestimate what that might be, or rather underestimate the ego. The other piece of it too is that if you're an offensive coordinator candidate, you've got two options that you can fall into, especially as this is a growing trend in the NFL, one of which is a situation where you are in control of the offense, and the other is where you're aiding in control of the offense. The New Orleans Saints provide the former. There is no offensive head coach here. You do walk in as the offensive coordinator and become a play caller. You do walk in as the offensive coordinator, and unless the New Orleans Saints do something stupid and weird with John Gruden, then all of a sudden, you're walking in and you have full control over the offense, right? That is appealing for an offensive coordinator that wants to continue to climb the ladder, because as we've learned, Eric Bieniemy and others across the NFL, play calling experience is clearly very important for an offensive-minded head coach. Even though you could find offensive coordinators for that offensive-minded head coach to call the plays, but I digress, because I don't want to get into that conversation today. But to believe that the New Orleans Saints don't provide the right opportunity for an offensive coordinator, I don't think that it's true. I disagree with that standpoint. Now, a lot of people will disagree with me disagreeing with that standpoint, and that's okay. That's okay. There's always two sides to every coin. There's always multiple sides to every one of these things. But it's never really an extreme. Here's the way that I'll highlight it. I don't think that anybody is actively running away from the New Orleans Saints organization. I'm not sure that anybody's actively sprinting towards the New Orleans Saints organization. But I do think that if they get them in the building and provide them with the things that the Saints do have to offer, a young core of playmakers when it comes to Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, Juwan Johnson. Can you sell Kendre Miller on the final game? Probably not, but can you sell the vision? Yes. Can you sell Alvin Kamara? 100%. I think all of that goes. And can you sell a 10-year NFL veteran quarterback that can run a scheme? Yeah. And can you now also turn around and sell an NFL veteran, 10-year veteran quarterback that made Pete Carmichael's offense look good over the last 5 weeks? Yeah. You get to do that now too. So I think that the Saints do provide an offensive coordinator with a very comfortable setup, but don't get it twisted. Probably the two most important things are, one, a stepping stone to further advancement, right? Get into the New Orleans Saints offense, become a play caller as an offensive coordinator, spend a couple of years doing that before eventually getting hired away as a head coach. That's the trajectory of offensive coordinators in today's NFL. That's just the truth of it. It's one of the reasons why the play calling head coach on the offensive side of the football is becoming such the trend, because then you don't have to recycle offensive coordinators every year when that OC is the one calling the plays, but then gets hired as a head coach and then gets hired as a head coach. And then you bring in another offensive coordinator and that coordinator gets hired as a head coach. Then you bring in another, on and on and on. You stop that cycle by hiring the offensive play calling head coach. And don't think either that with this being effectively Dennis Allen's real last chance to be a head coach, not only for the New Orleans Saints, but possibly in the NFL, that any offensive coordinator isn't walking in and going, well, if they move on from Dennis Allen after this year in 2024, if things don't go well, but I can put up good tape as an offensive play caller and as a leader of men, quote unquote, then all of a sudden I'm fast tracked to that very head coaching position potentially for 2025. Like, no one's ever just looking at 2024 or the very next year. Everyone's always looking for the advancement. So the New Orleans Saints could potentially provide them the stepping stone to advancement elsewhere, or potentially provide them advancement, what would be then internally, if the Saints moved on from a guy that's going into his third year as a head coach, hasn't inspired much confidence when it comes to the fan base, when it comes to media, all that kind of stuff. Even though the organization's confident in him, everybody knows this is effectively Dennis Allen's last shot. So to believe that offensive coordinators would run away scared from this New Orleans Saints organization because it's quote unquote a sinking ship or something like that, I don't think that's very true. I think the fact that it's a sinking ship, quote unquote, potentially when it comes to the head coach, could be an appeal. If that's the case, it actually becomes appealing for an offensive coordinator, because what you know around the NFL is that any NFL team that fails with a defensive head coach always goes to an offensive head coach next. So here's your stepping stone and here's your opportunity. I think that the New Orleans Saints actually do serve up a pretty good landing spot and jumping off point for a top flight offensive coordinator, and therefore should be in play when it comes to the 2024 season. Coming up next, Dennis Allen, like I mentioned, has inspired much of confidence in terms of the fan base that's on the Saints and Dennis Allen to fix moving forward. But he seems to have inspired a lot of confidence when it comes to general manager Mickey Loomis, maybe a little bit too much confidence. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, right? You all want to make sure that what brings home that trophy is exactly what it is that keeps your next ride or die alive as well. And eBay Motors is everything that you need to maintain your ride and level it up to peak performance as well, from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has exactly what you're looking for. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always be able to find what it is that you're looking for at eBay Motors. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit the first time, every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP that will bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's number one sportsbook and the official sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And right now, if you're a new customer, it's the perfect time to get involved with FanDuel. New customers will get a $150 in bonus bets by simply placing any $5 bet. That's it. Win or lose, guaranteed $150 coming back your way for simply placing a $5 bet. You can go with a heavy underdog like the Houston Texans, who are 9.5-point underdogs against the Baltimore Ravens. Put $5 down and you end up cashing out if you win against the spread there. Plus, you're guaranteed that $150 in bonus bets. Not a bad situation to be. Green Bay Packers also 9.5-point underdogs to San Francisco 49ers as well. So go check them out today. Get going while the playoffs are still rolling by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, family. Was Mickey Loomis a little bit too excited about Dennis Allen in his Wednesday hour-long press conference? It certainly feels so, in my opinion. Appreciate you very much for making Locked On Saints a part of your day and a part of your routine. And of course, making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 national sports stream that we've got, the first ever of its kind, over on YouTube. You can find it by subscribing to Locked On Sports today on YouTube. So Mickey Loomis evoked the names of Bill Belichick, Chuck Nuhl, and other Hall of Fame or future Hall of Fame in Bill Belichick's case, head coaches in terms of their rough starts to their careers and how their careers turned out in an attempt to sort of justify going back to Dennis Allen here in 2024. Now, look, do I agree with the idea of comparing? I'm just going to ask myself a series of questions here. One, do I agree with comparing Dennis Allen to Hall of Fame head coaches? No. Is Dennis Allen going to be a Hall of Fame head coach? Odds are no. So is there a reason to compare Dennis Allen to those Hall of Fame head coaches? Absolutely not. For two reasons. The first of which is that, like, odds-on wise, he's not going to be a Hall of Fame head coach. And that's not a commentary on Dennis Allen. Odds are that most NFL head coaches aren't going to be Hall of Fame head coaches, right? Matt LaFleur might not be a Hall of Fame head coach. Frank Reich won't be a Hall of Fame head coach, so on and so forth. So for every example that you can find of a future Hall of Fame or a present Hall of Fame head coach that had a rocky start to their career, you'll find probably about 10 more per when it comes to head coaches that had a rocky start and had a rocky finish that didn't end with them getting to the Hall of Fame. That's for sure. And so to evoke those names kind of overshadowed the point that Mickey Loomis was really trying to make. Because I think the point that he was really trying to make was that the organization wants to be patient. They wanted to give Dennis Allen a third season. Great, sure. You talked all this time about all these other, patient organizations out there. The Pittsburgh Steelers are a good example of that, so on and so forth. And trust me, I'm not comparing the New Orleans Saints to the Pittsburgh Steelers, who haven't had a non-losing season since Mike Tomlin was the head coach over there, or a losing season since Mike Tomlin was the head coach over there. But I get the idea about, like, hey, we want to be patient and all this other stuff, but just say that. Like, you don't have to compare them to all these Hall of Fame head coaches. I feel like it overshadows the point. It's okay to say that you're a patient organization, that you believe in Dennis Allen, and that you want to give him an opportunity to go out there and have his own offensive coordinator, not be working with Sean's guy, make the cultural changes that you feel you need to make within the organization, and see how things go in 2024. Sure, fine, perfectly logical and perfectly acceptable a thing to do as a person in charge of a multi-billion-dollar or multi-million-dollar organization that's a part of a multi-billion-dollar organization. It makes perfect sense to do that. People are going to disagree with it, But people would have disagreed with that no matter who that head coach is, right? Some people believe that Mike Tomlin shouldn't be going back to the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. Some people believe that Bill Belichick should have hung it up after this season, so on and so forth. There are always going to be dissenting opinions. That's okay. But coming out here and kind of drawing this immediate parallel between Dennis Allen and these other Hall of Fame head coaches or future Hall of Fame head coaches just doesn't feel like an effective strategy to get your point across, unfortunately. And it stinks because there's so much about what Mickey Loomis's press conference was that was good, positive, energetic, enthusiastic, accepting the responsibility and taking on the accountability of Trevor Penning, right? Didn't do him any favors, Mickey Loomis said. Putting him out there as a week 1 starter, despite all the injuries that he dealt with, probably not the right choice. Not getting him back out on the field, all these other things. Like the accountability that was shown there, the leadership that's shown. And look, I think we've been getting a little comfortable over the course of the past few years. So I want to make things uncomfortable. I'm trying to shake it up. We're not letting things slide anymore, blah, 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 blah. Like all those things were solid. Those are the right things to say as a general manager coming out of a 3rd straight season without a playoff appearance and all this other stuff. But all that gets overshadowed because you happen to use the wrong examples, or I don't want to say the wrong examples, but you happen to use non-equivalent examples of head coaches that finish their careers in the Hall of Fame or will finish their careers in the Hall of Fame to justify a hire that otherwise you could have justified very easily. And yes, people would have disagreed with it, but way more people are disagreeing with this strategy as well. The other reason why I didn't necessarily jive with it was because I think that that's way too high an expectation to put on Dennis Allen. Again, Dennis Allen, odds are, is not going to be a Hall of Fame head coach in his career. And you can feel however you want about Dennis Allen. That's true for most NFL head coaches at any given time. More than likely, they're never going to be Hall of Fame head coaches. So why would we draw comparisons to the Hall of Fame head coaches? If everybody was comparable to a Hall of Fame head coach, then why the hell do we have a Hall of Fame? Right? There would be no reason for that, and there is no reason for that. So that's the other thing. I think that that comparison is just one to where the expectation to have that level of comparison is to then imply the expectation that Dennis Allen will become a Hall of Fame head coach. And I don't think 29 out of 32 NFL teams could actively, truly make that claim about their coach right now. Maybe Andy Reid, maybe Bill Belichick, maybe Sean McVey. Maybe. We still have to see. And I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, and but in any case, that's what it is, right? There are not, let's say, 25 plus teams out there that can say, hey, our head coach is a future Hall of Famer. There's just simply not. And there will never be at a given time in the NFL. So we just don't have to do that. And then lastly, let's not pretend like Dennis Allen's first years as an NFL head coach started here in New Orleans. He had 3 years and then was fired after an 0-4 third-year start with the Oakland Raiders. Not many of those Hall of Fame head coaches were fired in their 3rd year after starting 0-4. So where's that comparison? If you're really going to make this comparison in earnest, right? So I just don't think that it was an effective way to go about it. I don't know. I don't think that we needed those comparisons, but hey, I think that the decision to stick with Dennis Allen is one that is explainable without having to use those Hall of Fame head coach comparisons. But maybe that's just me. All right, coming up next, we're going to be joined by my good friend, Travis Rogers from Over the Locked On Rams podcast, who does pre-half and post for the Los Angeles Rams, knows the Sean McVay system in and out. So why is it a good decision for the New Orleans Saints to pull from that Sean McVay coaching tree? The answer feels obvious, but let's break it all down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy and easily the most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. It's not you versus a bunch of mystery lineups. It's you and your knowledge of your favorite sports, your favorite players, your favorite teams going up against Prize Picks projections. Basically what they do is that they take players in different games, different leagues, different sports. You can find NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL, college football, college basketball, hockey, golf, whatever it is that you're looking for. You can find all of it over at Prize Picks, and they'll set a projection for that player, for that athlete. All you have to do is pick whether or not that player is going to come in at more or less than their projection, more or less than 2.5 birdies over an 18-round game of golf, for instance, things like that. So you do that for 2 to 6 players, and then all of a sudden you could win up to 25 times your money back if you get those right. So go to prizepicks.com, just locked on NFL today, and use the promo code in all lowercase locked on NFL for a first deposit match up to $100. It's the first deposit match up to $100 by going to prizepicks.com, just locked on NFL, promo code locked on NFL today at PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Hiring from the Sean McVay coaching tree would be the perfect decision by the New Orleans Saints in filling their offensive coordinator role. Why? Travis Rogers of Locked on Rams is going to be here in just a sec to help us break it all down. Don't forget, we are your team every day. Coming up on Monday, our next mock draft Monday. What if the New Orleans Saints wanted an offensive playmaker in the first round instead of a defensive pass rusher? How do they go about that? We're going to go to our next 4-round mock draft, 3 selections, break it all down in Monday's episode. And on Tuesday, I'm going to tell you the offensive coordinator candidates that the New Orleans Saints should avoid. And yes, John Gruden's on that list for me. All right, let's get to Travis Rogers of Locked on Rams, at Travis Rogers on your favorite social media, breaking it all down for us. I wanted to get from Travis why it's a good call for the New Orleans Saints to grab their next offensive coordinator from the Sean McVay coaching tree. And Travis Rogers didn't mince words on how good a decision that would be.
Well, I think the best case is that most of the fruit off of that tree, especially the offensive fruit, has been pretty effective as an NFL head coaching opportunity or to go somewhere else. The one that's really kind of face planted along the way was Brandon Staley. He, of course, made his bones on the defensive side. You look around the league, whether it's Kevin O'Connor, whether it's Zach Taylor, whether it's Matt LaFleur, you're taking at these guys that are offensively oriented guys that got a little bit of that McVay pixie dust sprinkled on them. They've all done a pretty good job, somewhere between pretty good and very, very good. So just being in his orbit, certainly, not only is he able to communicate what he sees and does, but I also think he's got a really good eye for talent. I think that's one of Sean McVay's secret powers is not only is he a motivator, he's a culture builder and these sorts of things, but he's really good at hiring people. He knows the right people to hire. So if he likes them, I think someone else should love him.
That's a really interesting point because it's kind of like it's not just that coach worked with Sean McVay. It's almost that Sean McVay identified that talent to begin with.
Yes, I think that's it. I think like any good executive, like any good, CEO or top of the pyramid, right? One of the skills that you need to have is you need to have really good lieutenants, and you need to be able to figure out who those guys are, empower them, let them go do their things. And, I think one of the things that right out of the gate that really impressed me with Sean McVay when he first got the job was hiring Wade Phillips. He wasn't worried about having a guy that had been in the league for 1 billion years and maybe taking his job. It's like, I need that guy's expertise. I need his knowledge. I need the institutional NFL kind of all about it that Wade Phillips brought, and he brought in a guy that knew more than he did, or at least institutionally did, and he was comfortable at it. At 30 years old, he goes and hires a 70-year-old guy, and he was really comfortable with it. He's very comfortable in his own skin, and he knows who's good at these things, and I think it's an incredibly useful skill because the brain drain inside the Rams coaching staff has been every single year since he's been here, and they keep cranking along.
Yeah, and it looks like it's just going to be another hot hiring cycle for the Sean McVay tree, as well as, of course, the Kyle Shanahan tree, but we don't need to talk about that one right now. But when it comes to that Sean McVay tree, and really like looking at Zac Robinson in particular, quarterback coach, passing game coordinator, he's worked with Matthew Stafford over the course of the past couple of years. So I know he's been dealing with injury, but I mean, this is a guy that got to the Super Bowl his first year in LA, has effectively kind of extended his career in Los Angeles. When you think about a guy like Zac Robinson working with Matthew Stafford and then potentially coming to New Orleans and working with Derek Carr, how do you feel the tools that would be provided to him as an offensive coordinator would be when it comes to the comparison of those two quarterbacks?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? McVay, I think, has answered the question because we've seen it. He made Jared Goff a very good player. Matthew Stafford was a very good player, and he took him to that next level. He continues to be at that next level, but resurrected Baker Mayfield's career. We'll see what happens with Carson Wentz and what goes on to there next year. So I think that Sean McVay is pretty good at doing what he does and rehabilitating some guys and taking whatever skill set it is that particular quarterback has and using that to their advantage. The hard part is for the quarterback coach is how much of that is McVey, how much of that is just Matthew Stafford being that good, because when he's healthy, there's the Patrick Mahomes of it, the Joe Burrow, there might be one or two other guys, but when it comes to just being able to throw the ball and being able to understand football, Matt Stafford's right near the top of the list.
Right.
So how much of that is a coach saying, do this, and how much of it is, dude, I got this, just let me do my thing? It's really hard to tell, right? Because the Stafford part of it kind of tweaks the equation a little bit. Had it been somebody a little bit less experienced, had it been somebody more in the Jared Goff early part of their career, I think you could put a little more in it. But I think that's the challenge for the Saints and anybody else that wants to hire a Robinson or a player like that. When you have a player like Stafford, how much is the player and how much is the coaching?
Yeah. All right. So you watch the Sean McVay offense every weekend during the football season. Let me ask you this. Because look, when you hire a guy from a coaching tree, the hope is that they bring that offense to your system or some version of that offense that's close enough to being, to find the same success. Mm-hmm. So if I were to say, okay, you get the Sean McVay offense in LA, but instead of Matthew Stafford, you get Derek Carr. Instead of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, you get Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Instead of Kyron Williams, you get Alvin Kamara. What are your thoughts on that?
I like it. I think the weak link in that chain is Carr. But I also don't think that Carr is, a player that is completely without value. He's kind of in that middle ground. Like, would you like to do better? Sure. Could you do a lot worse? Absolutely. Yeah. So he's kind of in that middle zone. I like the back. I like the two wide receivers. And, we've seen what Sean McVay does when he has a full complement of options offensively. We saw, you just mentioned the names with Williams and Nacua kind of coming into the mix this year.
Right.
It works when they can run the ball a little bit, when the McVay offense is at its best. The 2 years I think we've really seen it cranked up in a meaningful way was early with Todd Gurley. Now, there are not a lot of Todd Gurleys out there, so that's a different thing. But this version with Kyron Williams, when you have to defend the run and he can open up the middle of that field, look out. And with Kamara, I think you do have an option right there. So it's whether or not Carr is capable of processing it all. I haven't seen enough of him to have a really quick, but I know how much is put on the quarterback's plate in a Sean McVay offense. It's a lot. And if you can process it, I think it's going to work really well. The question is, can he process it?
Yeah, and 10 years of NFL experience certainly, I think, helps. But you're right; it's still a big question that you have to ask. Finally, for you, look, the New Orleans Saints are probably going to be revamping their offensive line quite a bit. The offensive line, of course, is very important to any system, any scheme. But you saw this New Orleans Saints offensive line struggle a little bit against the Los Angeles Rams earlier this year, or I guess last year. Now that we're in 2024, somehow we made it. We're here. But when we look at the offensive line in New Orleans, clearly there's some improvements that have to be made before you can really get a Sean McVay style offense off the ground, I would imagine.
Well, go back to the 2023 season, right? They're coming off of a Super Bowl where everything kind of went the way that you're hoping to. And even though you had a couple of, smaller issues along the offensive line, Andrew Whitworth missed basically the last month of the regular season. Yeah. But they had a guy that could step in Joe Noteboom. He did just enough to keep the trains running, right? And then all of a sudden, Whitworth comes back in the Super Bowl, and everything works out the way that it did. You win the whole thing. The next year, starting on opening night against the Bills, they started losing offensive linemen. They were down to third and fourth starters by the time you got to the middle of the season. They played 16 different starting linemen last season. Rams went 5-12. So I think, Sean McVay didn't get dumb in 2023. It's just there's only so many things you can do when there's no protection up front. McVay had no time to get Stafford anytime, and the whole operation broke down. This year, the Rams' offensive line wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. And it was enough to give those guys an opportunity to do what they want to do. So those five guys up front are kind of the entire thing that makes it go. Quarterback's most important, but shortly after that, it's those next five guys.
All right, y'all. Big thank you to Travis Rogers. We're over at Locked On Rams. You can find him and his co-host, Doug McCain, every single day over in the Locked On Rams podcast. Big thank you to Travis for coming through. And I appreciate you for coming through as well and being an everydayer, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Go check out Locked On Pelicans. Jake Madison and I were at the Pelicans game up against the Hornets where they destroyed the Hornets. It was an awesome game, and it was an awesome podcast to break it all down as well. And a big matchup today against the Phoenix Suns. You want all that info? Locked On Pelicans has you covered. Appreciate you as always for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, Nola. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.